Hey guys, I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you today, but we are going to continue our notes. So last class we looked at the expansion of the Supreme Court, how the federal government started to get some more power and make some big decisions. We also looked at the election of 1800, which was the first time that two different political parties peacefully transferred power. So our first president was George Washington. He wasn't affiliated with any political party. Remember, he actually warned us against political parties. Our second president was John Adams, who was a Federalist, and then he lost the election of 1800 when Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republican, won, but power was peacefully transferred from Adams to Jefferson, which showed how our political process in this country was working well. People were respecting the voting process and the transition of power. So today we're going to look at how our country started to grow and change under President Jefferson. So we're going to start out with a cheesy little video that kind of gives you the idea.
One thing you will discover when you get next to one another is everybody needs some elbow room, elbow room. It's nice when you're kind of cozy, but not when you're tangled nose to nosy. Oh, everybody needs some needs a little elbow room. That's how it was in the early days of the USA. The people kept coming to settle, though the East was the only place there was to go. The president was Thomas Jefferson. He made a deal with Napoleon. How'd you like to sell a mile or two?
Or 3 or 100 or 1,000.
And so in 1803 the Louisiana Territory was sold to us without a fuss and gave us lots of elbow room. Oh, elbow room, elbow room. Got to get us some elbow room. It's the West or bust. In God we trust. There's a new land out there. Lewis and Clark volunteered to go. Goodbye, good luck, wear your overcoat. They prepared for good times and for bad, They hired a Sacagawea to be their guide. She led them all across the countryside, reached the coast, and found the most elbow room we've ever had. The way was opened up for folks with bravery. There were plenty of fights to win land rights, but the West was meant to be. It was a manifest destiny. The trappers, traders, and the peddlers, the politicians and the settlers, they got there by any way they could. The gold rush trampled down the wilderness, the railroads spread across from east to west, and soon the rest was opened up for good. And now we jet from east to west, goodbye New York, hello LA. But it took those early folks to open up the way. Now we've got a lot of room to be growing from sea to shining sea. Guess that we have got our elbow room, elbow room. But if there should ever come a time when we're crowded up together, I'm sure we'll find some elbow room up on the moon. Oh, elbow room, elbow room. Got to get us some elbow room. It's the moon or bust. In God we trust. There's a new land up there. One thing you will discover when you get next to one another is everybody needs some elbow room, elbow room. It's nice when you're kind of cozy, but not when you're tangled nose to nosy. Oh, everybody needs needs a little elbow room. That's how it was in the early days of the USA. The people kept coming to settle, though the East was the only place there was to go. The president was Thomas Jefferson. He made a deal with Napoleon. How'd you like to sell a mile or two?
Or 3 or 100 or 1,000.
And so in 1803 the Louisiana territory was sold to us without a fuss and gave us lots of elbow room. Oh, elbow room, elbow room. You got to get us some elbow room. It's the West or bust. In God we trust. There's a new land out there. Lewis and Clark volunteered to go. Goodbye, good luck. Wear your overcoat. They prepared for good times and for bad. And for bad, they hired a Sacagawea to be the guide. She led them all across the countryside, reached the coast, and found the most elbow room we've ever had. The way was opened up for folks with bravery. There were plenty of fights to win land rights, but the West was meant to be. It was a manifest destiny. The trappers, traders, and the peddlers, the politicians and the settlers, they got there by any way they could. The gold rush trampled down the wilderness, the railroads spread across from east to west, and soon the rest was opened up for good. Now we jet from east to west, goodbye New York, hello LA. But it took those early folks to open up the way. Now we've got a lot of room to be growing from sea to shining sea. Yes, that we have got our elbow room, elbow room. But if there should ever come a time when we're crowded up together, I'm sure we'll find some elbow room up on the moon. Oh, elbow room, elbow room. Got to get us some elbow room. It's the moon of us. In God we trust. There's a new land up there.
Okay, so you could see in that video, elbow room, meaning that we needed some more space to spread out as settlers kept coming to the new United States for all of the great reasons that people still come today, for freedom, religious freedom, to be able to vote, to participate in a democracy, for land, for opportunity. All of those things was making our population grow, and we needed some more space. So President Thomas Jefferson ended up purchasing this territory here in the middle of the United States from France. Remember that was French land. So we purchased that land from Napoleon of France, and it actually doubled the size of the United States. So when the colonists, were here, we were just sort of this area as our country. And then you can see that by purchasing the Louisiana territory, our country literally doubles in size, which was a huge deal. So Thomas Jefferson purchased that huge territory from France. After purchasing the Louisiana territory, Thomas Jefferson wanted to send explorers out there to just sort of check it out. What was the land going to be like? How could we make money? We just wanted to explore. So he sent Lewis and Clark to explore the territory in the new Louisiana area, okay, west of the Mississippi River. Finally, we're able to go over there. Remember that whole thing with the proclamation of 1763, and the British didn't let us go, and so now we're finally exploring that area. So Lewis and Clark are these two guys, the explorers that were sent to explore that area. We'll talk about this chick in a second. So Sacagawea was a Native American woman, but she was actually bilingual. She spoke English as well as her tribal language, and she was very familiar with that land. So she was the guide and translator for Lewis and Clark when they started to go out to the Louisiana territory. Since they weren't familiar, and she sort of led them around the area. Okay, so as I showed you before, the significance of the Louisiana purchase was that our country doubled in size, literally overnight, by purchasing that area. We paid $3 million for that area, which sounds like a lot of money, but there are houses in Fairfax County that sell for $3 million, for goodness sakes. So the fact that we were able to double our country for that amount of money was pretty good, especially in the long run. Look how big our country became. All right, so growing, we're also changing. So the invention of this little machine here called the cotton gin by Eli Whitney totally changed our country. How could this little machine change our country that much? The cotton gin is a machine, so cotton, when you grow cotton, it's a plant, and it grows that little fluffy stuff like you think of with a cotton ball or Q-tip, but there are a lot of seeds in it, and so when you grow cotton, you have to pick those seeds out, which is a very tedious process. It takes a lot of time to do that. Slaves were doing that work on plantations. Cotton was a cash crop, but this machine cleaned cotton automatically. So you could put the raw cotton in there with all of the seeds and quickly spin this little wheel here, and it would clean all of the seeds out. Well, what does that mean? Who cares? The big deal with that is, since we're able to clean the cotton so much faster, we're able to produce more cotton at a faster rate, which in turn makes more money. It automated the process of cleaning cotton, which turned the South into this booming cotton kingdom, just making a ton of money, which in turn needed more slaves. So slaves were no longer needed to clean the cotton, but they were needed to pick the cotton and put it into the cotton gin at a much faster rate than before. So the Deep South becomes huge in slavery and also huge in selling cotton. All right, so this is just a little map to show you where cotton was being produced. You can see the darkest areas on the map are the areas producing the most cotton. So obviously we're down here in the Deep South, South Carolina, Georgia. These are all areas where cotton is booming. And to go back to our political parties, these plantation owners are going to be our Democratic Republicans. They want people staying out of their business. They want to make as much money as they can growing cotton. They want their states to be in charge of them. They don't want a big central government making rules. They don't want anybody trying to stop them from having their slaves. They want to be able to own these big plantations and make their money with cotton. So we start to see a huge difference between the politics down here in the South, the Cotton Kingdom, and the North, right, sort of above this line, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and up, where we're going to have big political differences. These guys up in the North, they don't care about cotton. They can't grow it. It's too cold. It's too rocky. They don't really get the whole institution of slavery like they do in the South. So we have some big differences starting between the North and the South, which will eventually cause a big problem. But we start to see people also moving west to the Louisiana Territory, but even beyond that, trying to explore more of North America for a variety of reasons. So what did people want in moving west? You can probably guess that, yes, they of course wanted more land to be able to spread out, to be able to raise animals, which they could sell for meat. They wanted to be able to farm. There was also talk of gold in the West, so people moved out in search of that. So lots of reasons to move west into the Midwest, into the Southwest, and into Texas. Of course, the only land out there that was actually owned by the United States was the Louisiana Territory. So we have settlers going into areas that don't belong to our country quite yet, which is going to cause some problems. But these settlers wanted economic opportunity. They wanted land to own, and they wanted to be able to farm and make money. How did they get out there? What helped westward migration? So you can see in this photo, people moving out. Look, they're on horseback. We've got this guy who's a farmer. We've got people moving in wagons, but also look at who's affected here. Who's this, right? Native Americans. We had already pushed them west when we settled on the East Coast. Now they're going to get pushed again. We're going to see an issue there. And this angel in this painting signifies something called manifest destiny. So American settlers believed that they had the God-given right to move west, that God wanted them to move west and to be successful, even at the expense of Native Americans. So manifest destiny is sort of how people convinced themselves that it was okay to shove the Native Americans out of their land and to take this land. They thought, this is what God wants for us. God wants us to have this opportunity. Okay, that idea is called manifest destiny. So the Oregon Trail was a huge way for people to move west. Basically, settlers continued to use this same path to get out west. So it becomes sort of an established way to travel with little trading posts along the way to get supplies. People had figured out how to sort of avoid mountains and get there the safest path possible. So the Oregon Trail is sort of like the first highway, if you will, across the country. Obviously, people are moving with wagons and animals, but this is taking people from coast to coast. Usually people would travel in groups for safety reasons, but it was still very dangerous to travel out west, but people thought the opportunity would be worth it. So we also started to build railroads to get out west via train, which was obviously a lot faster and safer than traveling on horseback. Canals were also made to move things. So a canal is basically a man-made like river. It's like a waterway where you can put items and things on boats and move them where you wanted to take them. So this helped with our industrial economy, being able to make stuff on the East Coast and ship it out to the West and vice versa. It also supported the movement of people. People could travel on these canals and these railroads as well, not just stuff. So you can see on here all these different trails and railroads that are starting to be constructed in these areas. Here's some big canals where things would move, mostly stuff would move and transport, again, building that industrial economy. But look where we are, guys. We're in the north, right? So like we said, there was that huge difference between the Cotton Kingdom down here in the south. They're not worried about moving materials. It's the north who's interested in this industry, this building stuff and moving it on canals and railroads to be able to sell it. Cotton down here is being produced on plantations and sent back to Europe for sale. Here's some railroads that are starting to come up to move people and goods. So as Americans started to explore and move west, we do start to get into some fights and battles. When you take people's land, that tends to happen. So Mexico actually owned Texas at this time. Mexico was much bigger than it is today. And when Americans started to migrate into Texas, there was a battle between the American settlers and the Mexicans. The most famous battle is the Alamo, where Texans fought against Mexicans, and the Texans eventually beat the Mexican army and won that land for the Union being our country, the United States. So Louisiana Territory was purchased from France. That was a very fair deal. We bought it, right? This is a little different. Texas, we fought in a war against Mexico and won that land. So that was a little different way of making our country bigger. So you can see here, this was that land that had been won at the Alamo. And then we continued to fight Mexico to gain more land in the West, which we will eventually win in the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. So eventually the Americans won more land in that Mexican War and expanded. So when you win a war and the other country has to give their land, that's called cession. So Mexico ceded, which is the past tense, ceded this land here in the green to America. So we gained this land here after winning the Mexican-American War. So that included some of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, a huge amount of land. So look how big our country got in a relatively short period of time. Less than 100 years, we went from this, right, just those original 13 colonies, to this. Our country is expanding at a huge, fast rate. So this is just sort of a little political cartoon to show us winning the war. So one of the symbols for the country of Mexico is the eagle. It's on their flag. And in this political cartoon is showing the Mexican eagle. And then after the war, obviously, we've taken everything from Mexico in terms of taking their land. So in 1849, as I talked about, there was talk of gold in the West. So people started to move, especially to California, to mine for gold, to find gold, to make money. Those people were called 49ers because the big year for that was 1849, when people started to move west into California looking for gold. That is why the San Francisco football team is called the 49ers. They are named after the gold rush that took place in that area in 1849. So we can see here sort of the growth of our country at this time. Obviously we had our original colonies, and then the Louisiana Purchase, the Texas annexation that happened at the Battle of the Alamo, the Mexican cession that we won from Mexico in that war. We did have another little purchase down here in 1853 where we bought this little chunk of land, and we're just going to keep growing. So like I said, Americans are having this idea of manifest destiny, believing that we had the God-given right to move west, to take land, that God wanted us to be successful as Americans, wanted us to grow, and didn't really think about the people who were there first. It was all about American opportunity. That's what manifest destiny is. And that's why you see in this photo sort of the God spiritual image moving westward. We've got all of our settlers, our wagons, our stuff, and this Native American just sort of getting shoved out of the way. So American Indians were very much impacted by the growth of the United States at this time. They were repeatedly getting into violent fights with American settlers who were trying to kick them off of their land to take it, to expand. So they just continually get shoved more west, more west, more west as Americans keep taking their land. They were removed from their homelands. We had already moved them when we took the colonies. Now we're moving again and taking land from those Native American groups. So American Indians were forced to pack up all their stuff and move away from their homes. Again, they don't really have the weapons to be able to fight back against these settlers who are forcing them away. And we call this sort of forcible movement the Trail of Tears. So when Native Americans were forced in huge groups like this to pack up their stuff, relocate, they were placed in areas like Oklahoma, places where American settlers didn't think the land was very valuable. It was hard to farm. It was very dry. The weather wasn't so great. We'll stick the Native Americans there because it's something that we're not really interested in. So that movement, that trail that moved Native Americans from where they were to states like Oklahoma was called the Trail of Tears. Obviously trail meaning that we're making them travel, we're forcing them to move. Trail of Tears because it was obviously very upsetting for these people to lose their land again and have to be forced into these reservation areas. Reservations are going to be the areas where Native Americans are allowed to live. Settlers and Americans would say, okay, we're not gonna, kill all of you or kick you out of the country completely. We're going to put you on reservations. Well, reservations were usually the least attractive land in the middle of the country where it was hard for Native Americans to grow food. It was a very difficult lifestyle. So we can see that our country has grown, which is great for Americans. We're expanding our economy. We're growing our population, but we always have to think about who is impacted by that stuff, right? The Mexicans were obviously impacted when we fought them and took their land. The Native Americans are affected. We're fighting and taking their land. So there's always a sad part, a tragic part of every tragedy. And in this case, the growth of our country did negatively affect a lot of people as well. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at all of these different areas that our country gained when we were growing in our territorial expansion. So you want to keep this up on your screen. This map is going to show the different areas that were gained by the United States over time, how we grew. And on your map that you have, you're going to label all these different areas, color them all a different color, label them the years, but I also want you to tell me how we were able to get that land. For example, we bought this piece of land, right? So this was something that was purchased. But how did we get the colonies? There was a different way we got that. How did we get this land, right? Remember that. So in each section, you need to tell me how we got that land. In next class, we're going to have our first content quiz. So you need to study, there's a study guide for you, where you're going to study everything from Washington and the Marshall Court, the Supreme Court, all the way through westward expansion. Okay? I'll see you guys next class.